I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors, and you're listening to the Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm one of the usual hosts, Mike Miller, and on this episode, we've got something very different for you. We've got a special interview with the one and only Mr. Roland Lazenby. Roland is responsible for some fantastic NBA biographies, including Michael Jordan, The Life, which is one of my favourite of all time, probably because it's Jordan, but you know that already. Showboat, The Life of Kobe Bryant, Jerry West, The Life and Legend of a Basketball Icon. You can find Roland on Twitter, @Lazenby. Whilst you're there, make sure, if you're not already, that you're following Double Clutch UK. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at that handle. Make sure, if you're not already, that you are subscribed to the podcast. And if you want to, in fact, even if you don't want to, go and give us a 5-star review, because that really helps us out. So, in the interview, we discuss his upcoming book on Magic Johnson, the evolution of basketball, the All-Star Game, which he recently attended, NBA in the UK in general, and the upcoming 2020 10-hour Michael Jordan documentary. It's a special one. I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, here is Mr. Roland Lazenby. Thanks very much, Roland, for joining us once again on the pod. You're a friend of the pod now because you've been on twice. So welcome back. How have you been?
Thank you. I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Loving life at the minute and enjoying this NBA season. Congratulations! You've recently signed a 2-book deal. Maybe we should start there. Can you tell us anything about what you're working on at the minute?
I just started work on a biography of Magic Johnson about a month ago. I've been interviewing so many people from his childhood and past. It's already a fascinating project. I hope it's my best book ever.
Well, is it going to be in the similar vein to The Life and Showboat, in that you go back in... Well, you went back in significant detail into the recent pasts of, the sort of the heritage of Michael and Kobe. Is it going to be a similar sort of intense deep dive into their past?
Yes, it is. There's always a look at heritage and lineage. But I really, Magic Johnson has an absolutely extraordinary adolescence. Unbelievable, uncommon in so many ways. And so I'm having fun. I'm amazed that every interview I do, he was just such an amazing young person. And yet was also all those things we think of when we think of teenagers, He could get out of bounds, as well as any of them. But he really... came of age at a difficult time in the USA, tremendous racial conflict going on, and his school leaned on him pretty heavily to be a leader in that effort to end the conflict. But that's just part of it. There's so many things. I'm really having fun discovering who the adolescent Magic Johnson was, the kid on the bicycle riding around town, playing basketball on all the courts, and just fun stuff.
Yeah, so it's Lansing, Michigan he's from, isn't it? And
it is.
It must have been, in that part of the world at that time being, well, he wouldn't have quite been 6'9" then, but he was a big guy with an afro. That must have been a really, he was quite an obvious character, if that makes sense, and so with his skills as well, he would be thrust into the limelight as a, well, like you say, as sort of the mantle for the school. I wonder how much of his personality was natural, or how much of it sort of was forced to come out of his experiences as a teenager.
Oh, I think that he is quite the natural personality. He is also has always been a person with an agenda. He is sort of like, he really presaged today's star players in that he was a player, a coach, and a general manager all rolled into one at the same time playing the game. They say the great coaches are control freaks. Well, many of the great players are also, and Magic, even at a young age, had a determined agenda. So it's fun to track that. It's fun to track. He's revolutionary as a point guard because he's a big man. So it's been fun tracking the revolution, finding out all the things that had to fall into place for him to be a 6'9" guy handling the basketball. That's common today, or somewhat common. At that time, no one at that size was allowed to handle the ball.
It is crazy that it's taken us, 30-odd years to get to a point where we're now seeing guys of his size be allowed to be the floor general. I mean, it only really became commonplace, and it's not even commonplace, but it popularized after LeBron came to the league. Essentially, that's when we started to see more and more of it happening. It's just really,
Tony Kukoc and figures such as that from Europe. And part of it is some of the European influence. Strictly in terms of American basketball, as a big point guard, 6'9", Magic was revolutionary, not only in his size, but especially revolutionary in how he played the position. Nobody has ever played point guard the way he did, and I don't think anyone ever will. I don't think it's possible. He was so unique.
How do you think and I know this is an impossible question, but how do you think he'd have fared in the modern game?
I think he would have had to get better as a three-point shooter, but he was such a competitor. They couldn't even figure out how he would do in the game of 1980. No one was sure how he would project into the NBA. He just was a different figure. And there were as many questions about him as probably any player ever. But the fact that he was named Magic and had that smile was enough for Jerry Buss, who was just buying the Lakers when Magic came along in the draft of 1979.
It's crazy. He was almost a bull, wasn't he? There was a coin toss, if I recall, if I remember the books.
Coin toss, and as soon as the Lakers won the toss, they let out a deep yell, particularly Chick Hearn, and then they signed Magic a couple of months ahead of the draft. He was one of the earliest signees in NBA history. They wasted no time in getting his name on paper.
And then he wasted no time just coming in and, making his mark. Obviously, he played on that team with Kareem, and then that first season, Cap went down with an injury, and Magic took over in the finals.
Legendary, and it wasn't even televised on live television in the US. It was on tape delay.
It's unfathomable, isn't it?
It showed itself the impact he and Larry Bird and then Michael Jordan had in elevating the game, not just in this country, but all over the world.
Do you think that, the way that we exist now as a society and everything is in the moment, do you think that his legacy is overlooked to a degree?
I do. And I think that, the HIV status meant that he ended his career early. He did have his role with the Dream Team, and that helped. But he could have played. He was the kind of player that could have played for a while. And so I tend to think of him as a sort of pre-digital. He did not make the media age that Michael Jordan stepped into. He certainly had the charisma, but culturally, the United States was not ready to pay an African-American male lots of money to be a marketing figure when Magic came along, and they were ready to do that finally 5 years later when Michael Jordan came along. But, it separates the two men a bit by about $1 billion.
Yeah, it certainly does. Do you think that the relationship between Bird and Magic is almost, and the way that evolved is like a commentary on American society at the time. You know, they were initially rivals, and to a degree, at least in the public eye, sort of fierce rivals. And then as their careers progressed and matured, they became much closer, well, off the court, certainly. Do you think there's any sort of, you can draw parallels between the, I don't want to use the word evolution, but the progression in American society at that time?
It's hard to do that. I think they're, in a lot of ways, they're just two guys who were similar, just playing basketball. One happened to be black, one happened to be white. Now, the country itself seized on that and made it really big. Both of those guys, I mean, it really wasn't something they were seeking to do, but it ended up making the whole issue much bigger. And so I think it's been good that they, while they didn't like each other very much while they were competing, and that was in an age when guys competing didn't like each other. Today, they all go on vacation together and share the same agents, and, you know, sort of all this fraternization off the court. Back then, it was all spit and blood, you know, there was none of that. And so I think it helps, it has helped race relations in this country a bit to have two high-profile guys like that from from opposite sides of the racial culture in this country to have the appreciation they have for each other. And so, you know, that's part of sports contribution to society, particularly in this country. I guess it's been the same in the UK, but, you know, society far too long was caught up in, and it still is to a great degree, caught up in racial differences and class and all of the prejudices that go with that. But sports was the great conversation, the equalizer, the meeting ground, the place where power shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously a huge topic, and Magic Johnson's career is a huge story. At what point are you bringing the book up to? Is it going to, you know, right up to present day as Lakers GM, or is it going to be ending, you know, when his?
No, it's going to do the whole thing. He's had an extraordinary life. You know, I was really around that team a whole lot when he attempted his comeback in 1992. And while being HIV positive. And he was really courageous, I thought, just observing things up close, because there was so much fear and so much misunderstanding about his status as HIV positive. And but, you know, and as badly, I mean, this guy, there's ever a player who just absolutely lived and breathed basketball. I mean, it was his soul. And he could have persisted in playing when he tried to come back. But there was so much negativity, and he really wanted to play, but he did not want to harm the game. And he saw that all of the controversy would quickly consume the game. And as much as he wanted to play, he didn't. He quit. It was a tough thing.
Yeah, it must have been, like you say, it was his lifelong passion. He sort of lived and breathed it, and then to have it taken away from you before you're ready to walk away from it must be an incredibly difficult thing to go through, especially under those specific circumstances. I find the whole thing fascinating, especially sort of, you know, some of the comments that came from his fellow players and dream teamers at the time that spring to mind, and it's just, it's the perception, and then it's almost like, because of the position he was in, I almost feel like he was able to, but no means overnight, but over time, he was able to raise awareness and improve understanding of the disease to a degree. And that's putting not too much credit at his feet.
No,
but
I think he helped do that. It was such a shock in 1991 when that was announced, and he was such a large figure. He had consumed the game and been the figure who ruled it, basically.
Yeah, no, he was months away from the finals, wasn't he?
Right. And so he had been this figure from the moment he arrived in the NBA. He had a lot of help. That Lakers team, had been stocked with great players. But he was the driving force. And so, no, it was there was no understanding of what being HIV positive meant. And there was no understanding of the disease, and it was a deadly disease. It still is. It still kills lots of humans. But, he did what he could. And the main thing he's done since is live an engaged life and do lots of more big things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the current GM of the Lakers, and at one point,
Sign LeBron James.
Exactly, and he's probably he's getting fines left, right, and centre for air quotes tampering. I think that part of that's just Magic's personality, and it's almost like he needs to do that as well. He's the salesman. He needs to tell people he wants them. It's part and parcel of it, because he knows he needs talent to win.
And it's also the age.
Yes,
they're tampering right and left. Virtually every part of the All-Star game this past weekend was one form of recruiting or another.
Exactly.
Even the league turning the teams over to top players. Instead of the Eastern and Western Conference, it's Team LeBron. All of that just sets the stage for the age of tampering. The new age of immensely heightened player power.
Yes, and that's something I wanted to cover. So that's brilliant. We're going to get onto that very shortly. So you've just been at the All-Star game. How was your weekend?
Well, I'm old and I need knee surgery, and the All-Star game was just miserable in terms of security and the confusion over how they wanted to do things, and it was spread out and not particularly well coordinated. On the other hand, they had more than 2,000 journalists in the city of Charlotte to cover the event, and so considering the degree of difficulty of coordinating such a mob, and they arrived from all over the world, which is a sign of the health of American pro basketball. Besides my annoyance with security and confusion and my age and my knee, I thought the weekend went pretty well. It was pretty interesting in a lot of ways. I traditionally despise the All-Star game as a bunch of foolishness. Really not germane to true basketball. That's a faulty view I've had. There are things about it that are charming and important. There's a lot of hooey to it as well, a lot of fluff. Unfortunately, the game itself, the regular games, have become more like the All-Star game. There's not much defense, and it's made up of all these grand offensive displays.
How much of that do you think is a deliberate, almost marketing ploy by the NBA to create a glitz and glamorous sport that's appealing to the eye?
Well, I think it's the entire domain of the suits. Now, some of the basketball people said basketball had gotten a bit too thuggish, and so the changes began at the Rules Committee ostensibly, but make no mistake, the suits wanted it. It's the same in American football. They've really tried to eliminate defense, and it's actually a good thing there because American football is a brutally physical game. I've played it some in college and high school, and it has needed some cleaning up. But the new age is, caters to fantasy fans and those people who want to see tremendous offensive displays. And basketball has gone a long way toward eliminating all the physical defense and all of the drills associated with it, all of the things that went into keeping Michael Jordan in check, not just in hand check, but in very physical check. And the age that was, the game that was, bears little resemblance to today, and it creates a real problem for people trying to do comparisons. Sport is a exercise in comparison. We want to say who's the greatest this or who's the greatest that, and so the idea that you can compare players from today's juiced up game where there's no physical challenge to players of yesterday who had to endure often very physical challenges to play and to score. It's hard to do. Michael Jordan, of course, had a great answer on the eve of the All-Star game when someone asked him about James Harden scoring 30 or more points, had a streak of 30 games doing that. And, Jordan had a similar thing. And he was asked about that, and he said, well, the most difficult thing I ever did was win 6 championships with it. And the scoring thing, just sort of happened. But Jordan was correct. That's brilliant because none of these guys. Now, I think the Warriors could do it. They could easily win 6 if they don't break up their team in the off season. But it is quite a challenge to win that many physically and mentally. And so Jordan may be safe for a while longer in that. But it's really hard for a guy like Harden to answer that because he's never played well in the playoffs, particularly well. And the teams he's on have never done particularly well in the playoffs. Certainly not winning a championship. And I don't think that's going to happen this year either, although they're having another bang-up regular season. And the coach, Mike D'Antoni, who's a fine man, an excellent person, and yet he's just never been able to put together a team that could seriously compete for a title. They've played well in the regular season. But on to the bigger question, I need to add this. The suits who set this up, who changed the rules so that it wasn't so brutish, the NBA wasn't so brutish, the response to that by fans all over the world has meant that the NBA is raking in huge amounts of money. I don't know if that will continue, but as long as it does, I never see the NBA retreating from the juiced up offensive game that's played today.
You mentioned at the start, when we were talking about Magic and Bird, about their rivalry and the physicality, and now it's all a fraternity. How big an impact do you think these rule changes have had on making everyone friendly? It's almost like that. You mentioned it. There was the NBA needed to clean its act up. You had things like the malice in the palace, so the rule changes needed to come in to take away some of that physicality. Is that why we've got this fraternity that we see now? Then is that what we're essentially saying, that
I think that's a big role. If somebody busts you in the face during a game and you lose a tooth, you're not exactly peaches and cream with them in a summer vacation. A game that really doesn't have much physicality and much in the way of physical defense just doesn't create that kind of hyper intense atmosphere that playoff basketball used to create. And it's been a process over the decades. I don't want to just hang it on recent developments. They used to call in America, they used to call basketball the cage game because it was played in all the mining towns and rough neighborhoods of the Northeast. And they'd have these big rope nets around the court that resembled cages. And the press would describe the players like monkeys in a cage. And the miners and the roughnecks and all these various communities would come in and look at the games through the cages. And they would heat up coins and other things to throw at the players. It was not quite barbaric, but it was pretty close. And so over time, there has been a refining of the game. And of course, over time, the NBA became a league that focused on its star power. That's how it succeeded. And that has made the players increasingly rich and powerful in making key decisions about the game. There are a lot of good things about that and some things that aren't so good. But it's sort of the evolution that we have, and I think it's fascinating and important that players can make so much money. They're paid as entertainers.
So having watched basketball for a number of decades now, how do you get frustrated watching the modern game? Because you're very much on the defense is gone. This is, it's a show, it's entertainment now.
Well, for someone who's never won a championship, D'Antoni's philosophy has had immense impact on the modern game. And when the Warriors, we had a watershed in 2015 when the Warriors won the title. And they did it with an extraordinary lineup, with extraordinary shooting. They could spread the floor. They really played brilliantly. And it's funny how everyone immediately took that as a sign that D'Antoni's philosophy worked. And so we have some teams that are really doing some fine shooting, but you see an awful lot of games and an awful lot of bad shots. And some nights it's just not watchable. It is not appealing. I say that as a connoisseur of the old game. Apparently, younger generations lap it up. There is a degree of difficulty. I think Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson and those guys on the Warriors would be stars in just about any era. And so that's good. And all these other players, when you can come out, really what it is a shooting exhibition. I don't care if you have somebody guarding you or not. It's pretty amazing, a lot of the shots they hit. Even if they're just out of warm-up shooting, to shoot that into the depth and craziness of the shots. There's an appeal in that, obviously. But that appeal comes at the price of so many players who can't shoot, jacking up, and being required to really, because of how the game's played, to jack up bad shots, ugly play, inconsequential, mindless play that really doesn't feature a lot of the great teamwork and discipline of the past. Now, the Warriors on the other hand, epitomize the new age and the old age of basketball. They pull it off all in one, and they're fascinating. And there are other teams in pro basketball I really enjoy watching. One of them is the Brooklyn Nets. They play really hard, and they are not a lot of big name players on that team, but they just play so hard, and they're turning what has been a traditionally bad franchise into one that's worth watching every night just by virtue of how hard they go at it.
I think they're in a transitional phase at the minute, and it's really nice to have some optimism there, because in recent seasons I've actually boycotted watching Nets games because I just haven't been able to stomach it.
It's been terrible. Yeah. Unwatchable. But now they're very watchable. They are exciting, and it's fun. They have this sort of this true hoops bug. They really honor the game, and just the way they play and their chemistry and all of those good things, and how hard they defend. And put them on every night if I were the NBA.
Do you think a big part of that, though, is that they're not supposed to be where they are now? You mentioned they don't have any star players. Obviously, they got D'Angelo Russell, Karis LeVert, who are guys who are not. D'Angelo's an all-star.
Those guys are good, but they are not. Now, D'Angelo Russell is starting to get some recognition, but they are not what you would consider stars, I don't think. They are star quality, but I don't think they have a big following yet.
So do you think then some of the appeal of the Nets is that they are inevitably underdogs who are playing the right way?
Yes, but I think they're actually becoming a very good team. And so it's fun to watch that process, all the work that goes into it. Anytime someone can flip the script. I was at the All-Star game, and it's so maddening with those 2000 media. It used to be such a relaxed affair where you could go with your tape recorder and sit down at a table. I mean, there'd be a number of reporters there, but you could talk to virtually everybody, and you could just wander around, and all the figures were there. And I would go and do dozens and dozens of interviews, and now it is just mayhem, and it is all organized, but there's none of that give and take you get in a relaxed interview or in a personal exchange. But Joe Harris was being, he had his podium and the microphone and a small group of reporters there. Most of the other places around, the people were getting mobbed. But Joe Harris also played at the University of Virginia, in a state where I live. And so I was able to chat with him and talk to him a bit about how he flipped the script on his own career and how the Nets were doing that. And I also got a chance to talk with him because he didn't think he had any chance. He didn't give that impression that he had any chance of outshooting Steph Curry in the three-point showdown. But he had this confidence and this. He puts on no pretensions whatsoever. He's a guy who'll just walk out of the building and walk to his apartment after a game. He's not they love him in New York. It was sort of the thing Phil Jackson used to do when he was a young player with the Knicks. He'd ride the subway to the game. He was not a limo kind. Of course, back in the days, Walt Frazier would take a limo perhaps to the game, but the modern NBA, it's all about limos and driving your cars or whatever. And Joe Harris is this very unpretentious guy who comes in. He has this tremendous confidence. And so it was fun to chat with him, and then to see him win that three-point shootout was a treat, I have to admit.
It seems to be for most people the highlight of the weekend, the three-point shootout. Did you go to all the events? Did you watch things like the dunk contest and everything like that?
I watched some of it. I'll be honest with you, many years I get bored with that stuff. I go to do interviews.
Yeah.
I'm not one to hype and to, some people get invested in the moment. This has got to be the greatest moment because I'm here watching it, and all this dunking and it's great. Don't get me wrong. I love to watch competitive games. And the all-star stuff is just sort of fluff. I was interviewing the great Norm Van Leer. He was one of these two-fisted guards for the old Chicago Bulls with Jerry Sloan, another two-fisted guard back in the 70s. And and they were notorious for taking charges and just playing very physical defense. And I was interviewing Norm, and he recalled when he was in a position to go to the All-Star game. He was having a great year. And he looked at me and said, what was I going to do? Go to the All-Star game and take charges? And so there's no real format. There's no format for real basketball in any of this stuff. And it's all contrived stuff.
Would you like to see any changes? Do you think there's a way of fixing the All-Star game?
I don't know. I've never considered it worth that much thought. But I would make the game competitive if possible. The All-Star game's important for what it is. It's an easy target for guys like me. I think the game itself during the regular season has taken on a little bit too much of the feel of the All-Star game. They really are silly exercises, and they're offensive exhibitions. I don't think I've ever sat and watched one of the NFL's Pro Bowls, which is its version of the All-Star game. I've occasionally watched Major League Baseball in this country. They have the Home Run Derby. I've occasionally watched that. And so those are curious exercises. I get more fun out of watching players warm up before the game. They get into all their own little shooting games and drills, and they're betting with each other and heaving up shots. A lot of them are working seriously on taking shots, and that's changed. And I used to get a huge delight out of watching Larry Bird go through his furious workout before games in Boston Garden. That was the part of the tradition I liked. But now I think it costs $650 to get into the All-Star game. It's reserved. It's a huge TV event.
It almost feels like a marketing event to remind the hardcore NFL addicts that there's another sport now. Theirs has ended for the year, and then also to try and capture the attention of new fans by showing them these spectacles of elite athletes doing things that you didn't think were possible to do. And it's like a gateway to the real game as people get more and more into it. And you find that I find certainly that a lot of seasoned fans, All Stars, it's just a week off in the season, really.
It is. It's great for journalists. It used to be. It was what I called a gathering of the tribes. And it still is to some degree, where you had all the people in one place. You could walk around with a recorder and talk to everybody and gain an immense education about things. And it's still that. I still think it's a great opportunity for interviewing and learning. And there's part of it I like. It's just probably that I'm old and it's passed me by. But I will say that you said something interesting about the relationship of the NFL and the NBA in this country. And the NFL has, for a long time, before that, this country adored Major League Baseball. It was the culture. And over time, that love, that major emphasis went to the NFL. It's where all the betting is. It's a violent physical game, and it makes often for spectacular television. And basketball, was a bunch of grown men running around in their underwear. And so, and a lot of them, especially in the early days, were just a bunch of stiffs.
Yeah.
And they were played in, like I said, in cold gyms in the Northeast, and with lopsided basketballs, and the skill level was a work in progress. And of course today it's staged so well. Even the ugliest regular season game has unbelievable staging and theatrics and booming sound and cheerleaders and all kinds of goofballs doing all kinds. It's a carnival, but the NFL's future is more limited today. It's purely a domestic product. I know they stage a game over there in London.
Yeah, I think they had 3 or 4 this year.
Yeah, they're trying hard. David Stern, the NBA commissioner, was yesteryear, was very smart in the 1980s. He was dumping televised NBA games all over Europe very cheaply, and it caught on everywhere except in Great Britain. I don't think it rules other places, but it has a strong following in Poland and Italy and France, and there is some following in Great Britain, but Great Britain has its own traditions. And while there's other countries, and in Asia, the NBA has had big success. And that's just not the British way. That was really impressed upon me when I went over. I was stunned that my Kobe biography was nominated for the Cross British Sports Book Awards, because sport in the UK is very little about basketball. But the NBA globally is in a good place. And that means lots of global revenue, lots of TV money. The NFL, on the other hand, I don't know where it's going. Have you been to any of those games in London?
I went to the first one, which I want to say was about 2007, and it was...
Obviously, it made a huge impression on me.
I used to follow the NFL, to be fair, but I decided that I couldn't watch 2 sports. The amount of basketball I consume, it just wasn't physically possible.
Right. It's true. Especially if you're going to be... Now, these guys that cover all of them, I'm stunned.
Yeah, it amazes me how they can do that and retain it all. But it's interesting what you're saying about Britain's relationship with the NBA, because we've been very fortunate enough to have the London game here for, I want to say, 10 years now. But it feels like the recent game in January was the last hurrah. There were lots of... Well, there were hints from Adam Silver that going forwards it could be in France, in Paris particularly, and that maybe it was time that Europe, the wider European sort of area, deserved a game. And it totally makes sense to me, because I feel like as a country we've squandered our opportunities to embrace the game. And I say that, and at the same time, in terms of consumption of the NBA...
That's not a fault of yours.
No, yeah, through no fault of mine. But the consumption of the NBA, as a country, the UK has the highest League Pass subscription rate in Europe, and is the second highest merchandise sales. So that there is an appetite for it, but it just seems to be a subculture. It's still it's still just bubbling away underneath the surface, and I can't get my head around why. Whereas the NFL, because they've been coming over every year, seems to have exploded. And one of my theories is that, well, it's a hell of a lot easier to follow a sport which plays one game a week on a weekend normally versus try and follow a team that plays 3-4 times a week at unsociable hours, it just makes the NBA a lot more difficult to follow. But there's obviously an appetite for it. It just amazes me that it's not thought of more highly.
Well, I think the UK is still very much an empire, even though the official designations as such are not there. And I think the relationship with the United States is that it's a former colony. And, it's sort of deeply ingrained in some of that. I think as an empire, the UK sort of has its own agenda. I know it's been set back by Brexit, no question. But every democracy in the known world, it seems to me, is going through challenging times right now. I don't think that really has the impact on basketball. From what I saw in my time there, the UK is very well engaged with a variety of sports. And they are the kinds of sports that are played throughout its empire. And that goes hand in hand with the BBC and its coverage. And you really get a sense that the UK is about a bigger agenda. I mean, I am called to go on the BBC from time to time to discuss American basketball, but it's just not a priority.
It's a very high level, isn't it? That it's just it's sort of no detail at all that it's discussed. The other week, I was on one of the BBC Radio 5 channel, and it was a very, very light conversation about the trade deadline, essentially, and I'm not even sure entirely that it was exactly what they were looking for, if that makes sense. They sort of tried to draw comparisons with the football soccer transfer window, things like that, and they couldn't wrap their head around just the idea that contracts are exchanged versus players are being purchased and re-signed, and it's fundamentally alien to the vast majority of people.
It is, and the language of basketball, all of this information, you can get on a BBC broadcast, and in about 5 seconds, you're off in the weeds for the listeners. It's simply not a world that many of them participate in. I think that American global shoe manufacturers, basketball shoe manufacturers, would love and have lusted for years to get their claws deep into India. India is still part of the empire. It's so connected to the UK culturally, in sports culturally. I just don't think they may have some success here or there with it, selling basketball shoes in India. It is a huge market, but I don't think this is a bad thing. I don't think the whole world should be, and I love the global interest in basketball, in American basketball. It's really not an American game anymore. It's played in so many places. And that really started as soon as it was invented, because it was invented at the School for Christian Workers. And these were missionaries who took the game all over the globe in a matter of months. It was being played in China and Japan and all these places at the turn of the last century. But I think it's good that globally we have different value systems and that we value different things. I think one of the disappointing things about America is the sameness that has overcome it. Every town has the same restaurants, the same franchises, the same hotels. I don't think there's anything wrong with the UK sort of having a lukewarm response to the NBA. I think the heritage and traditions celebrated in the UK are just fine.
Okay, so let's move on away from the from the poor state of the UK's appreciation of the NBA. So it was obviously Michael Jordan was hosting the All-Star game, although he wasn't there for over his birthday weekend.
He kept a very low profile.
He did. Which was disappointing for me. I'd have liked to have seen more, but maybe that's because I'm a massive Jordan fan. We're about a year away from...
Profile. He likes being in Charlotte. He likes slipping off and playing golf and having his life. He does not enjoy trying to carry all of that human interest.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. He spent so many years in the spotlight that he's enjoying some time out of it. We're about a year away from the release of the 10-hour documentary, The Last Dance. I know that you were around the team at the time because you were writing Blood on the Horns.
Right.
Can you take us back there? What sort of things can we expect, or do you think we should expect from this series? 'Cause from
Andy Thompson was the photographer and filmmaker for NBA Entertainment, and he had access to everything with Jordan behind the scenes. Andy Thompson is Klay Thompson's uncle.
Yes, yeah. It's crazy how that's linked, isn't it?
It is, and Andy's a great guy. I saw him at All-Star Weekend. He had this fabulous film he shot 20 years ago. And for years and years, he had it trying to get some movement on getting it made into some sort of public event because all of it's fascinating footage. And Michael had no interest. And he was probably also very cagey and very smart because the game has changed so much. If he had released it earlier, it might not have had the impact that it will today or will next year to see all of this story. And it was a very contentious season. It was a team fighting, sometimes viciously, with itself, mostly between the team and management. But it created some crazy conflict. It was very frustrating for the fans to have this great team that was in which it was preordained that the team would break up at the end of the season. There really hasn't been much like it in American sport, and probably not in global sport. And so I think it will be very compelling television. And I'm eager to see it just because I've witnessed the personal story, and I was there while they were shooting it.
I can't wait for it. I'm desperate to sort of to get my hands on a copy and just consume it. I'm trying to work out, because obviously the level of coverage back then was nowhere near the level now. You know, the constant media cycle 24/7. But I know from having just even on this side of the pond that era Bulls team were covered like the Beatles were covered everywhere they went. And so I'm half of me is like, what hasn't already come out that what is there that we don't know about? And then the other half of me is just excited to see something that potentially could have been, could be new. It's
it's going to be revelation by 1,000 points of light. I think there are going to be all the little inside views and details. I don't think you're going to see some sweeping news-breaking moment. I think the power of this film is going to be showing the greatest player in this capstone achievement, winning his sixth title amidst all this conflict. and seeing him in a full and complete way.
I cannot wait for it. It's going to be amazing. I'm trying to figure out, because it's an ESPN film, isn't it? So it's going to be interesting to see how the rights are picked up in the UK. But yeah, cannot wait for it, and it should be amazing. Just before you go, let's quickly just have a look at your predictions for the rest of the season. Is there any sort of things you think we should be watching out for? Obviously, there's been disparity between the East and the West in terms of player quality, but quite frankly, I found it an extremely eventful trade deadline and enjoyed it a lot. There seems to have been a rebalancing to a degree, not necessarily of top, and I realise I'm caveating this hugely, but not of superstar current talent, but there's been some really good moves, I think, to bolster some of the top contenders in the East. Do you have any predictions for the run-up to the playoffs?
The East is a little difficult to figure because so many changes have been made. And you always have to watch changes to see how they play out. But I don't see anything slowing up Milwaukee until the playoffs. I think Philadelphia is going to get better. I think Boston's still a very big question mark. I just don't think anybody can deal with the Warriors in either conference.
That does seem the inevitable again, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't see that. I just think they now have more power, more options, the Warriors, than ever. And it's the only thing will be all the off-court stuff, the business of who's going where, who's giving up, who's leaving what. But, those teams, Steve Kerr was on that Bulls team in '98, and he certainly understands how important it is to have his team playing in the moment, and his Warriors will do that. I don't think they'll lose. I could be wrong, but I don't think they will.
I can't see them losing.
I don't think anybody from the East is going to give them a real serious challenge.
They're just too much, aren't they? Do you foresee this summer being the end of this iteration of the Warriors? Do you think they're going to be able to keep hold of they've got over the next 2 years? Obviously, this summer they've got KD and Clay, and next year they've got Draymond. So it's how long before these Warriors, who have been, in my opinion, certainly, and it's not an unusual opinion, have been one of the greatest teams we've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. How long before that window is closed?
Well, it depends on a lot of trends we're seeing in the NBA. The power of players to move and to create their own unions and to basically play pickup basketball, to pick up. It's not just the All-Star game, but the league itself. The power players are looking to unite. That's the essence of pickup basketball. That's the heart of how the game is played all over the world. If you go to the courts, you want to get your best team so that you can keep winning and keep playing. And so there are other things. It's not hard for players to get their heads turned. They think they need to do other things. I think the big key will probably be Durant. And it's so hard to read what's going on there. If Durant stays, I think the Warriors find a way to keep it fresh, and that will be their challenge. And we will see other teams trying to morph into the kind of assemblies that, can rise to that Warrior level.
Yeah, I do feel that they've made other teams work harder, if that makes sense. Other teams have had to evolve more quickly, but there's no way they can recoup this lost ground until age or circumstance ends this Warriors. I can't see anyone getting near them.
It guarantees for Durant and Steph Curry that if they somehow manage to stay together and win championships for the next 3 or 4 years, They will take turns being MVPs. They will have all-time legacies. They will be esteemed at a level that many of the other very fine players today will never reach. They'll all be also-rans. They'll have to get on TV and try to misbehave like Charles Barkley.
Do you think this sort of player power era and this whole sort of teaming up and leaving small markets, do you think that's going to cause any concerns with the next CBA talks in 2 years' time?
Oh, yes. I think who knows where all this heads. I think what Rich Paul did, LeBron's agent, and Anthony Davis's agent, what he did was in some ways very ham-fisted. It was a power move to make that play, and it got people fired. It got ugly. It really has sort of wrecked the mindset of several teams. And so this has its destructive elements too. Who gets chosen and who doesn't? And so it has a lot of potential for people to be angry for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it gets away from that old atmosphere. We go back to Jordan again in the conversation. When he was in the league, there's an old Western saying in the United States, you dance with who brung ye.
Okay.
Whoever brought you to the dance, you dance with them. If the Bulls drafted you, unless you get traded, that's your team. You make your stand there. And that's what Jordan did. And that's what so many of Magic and, so many of the players from that era found a place to make their stand and did it. This is a nomadic league. It's all to be decided. Certainly not by guys like me. It's decided by guys, with those $1,000 phones who are the mega consumers of the age. I have a fairly good view of things, but a lot of this is beyond my vision.
Fair enough. That sounds like a good place to leave it. But that was awesome. It was great to have you on again, Roland.
I'll tell you, it's a great interview, a wonderful conversation, great questions. I always enjoy it.
So that's all we've got time for on this episode. Thank you very much to Roland for taking a break from his hectic research schedule for his upcoming book, which will be called Magic Johnson, The Life, and is due out in 2021. Just before we recorded, Roland mentioned that he'd already clocked up over 100 hours of interview research for this book, so that's a huge number. Wow, fair play. I'm very much looking forward to reading it. Again, if you're not already, make sure you're following him on Twitter at Lazenby and us on all social media platforms at Double Clutch UK. Thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.